Hi everyone! Welcome
Hi.
to another episode of Her Data Learns. It has been a while now since we released a new episode. My name is Yanushki and I have my co-host Jennifer with me. And we have a wonderful guest today. Jennifer, do you want to introduce him?
Yes, I'm so excited. We have the one and only Sam Parsons with us for today's episode. Sam not only is a Tableau Zen Master, but he is also one of the finalists for the Invis 2021. And we're really excited to have you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Hi, pleasure to meet you both. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today.
Yay! So Sam is going to be our guru for the day, and he's going to teach us about Tableau dynamic tile layouts using collapsible containers. I'm sure everyone is kind of familiar where we saw that recently.
Yeah, I gotta say, during the Invis, me and Danushki watched it together. We had our own little two-person watch party, and I remember seeing you put this together, and my jaw just dropped because I hadn't seen a lot of work with it yet. I know it's part of new features, but yeah, we're really excited. And what a fantastic way to lay out a story, and as you did for your Invis final. So very exciting.
Yeah. Great. Well, I hope to sort of take you through that visualization and other use cases. I'm really excited by what I heard at Tableau conference and Devs on Stage, where they are taking that tiled containers to the next level, making them dynamic. So maybe we'll discuss that later as well.
All right.
So, right.
Take it away.
Yes, let me share my screen. Okay. It is disabled. Can you enable it?
Yes. Done.
It's done? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Bear with me. Okay, this isn't me showing off, by the way. This is just my background. Okay.
What a stunning background.
So a little bit of a brief sort of recap about containers. Back in 2019.2 Tableau version, they introduced show and hide containers, but those show and hide containers could only be used with floating objects. So we were limited to what we could do with them. And in this visualization that I used for Invis, I used so many of those floating show and hide containers. And I was using them to introduce labels, introduce how to read sections. And the great thing about them is they come in instantly. There's no calculation involved in them. They are literally just popping up into the view as you need them. And I use them further through this visualization to add in detail and interest. Oh, that one doesn't work. Such as bringing in GIFs and all sorts of things. You can just use them in a fun way. And then in 2021.2, I think it was, so let's come out of there, they expanded that feature to make it accessible when you are using tiled layouts. So this is a standard dashboard, and I've given it away. This is the standard dashboard that you would normally sort of see. And what we can now do with 2021.2 is create areas in our dashboard that can be brought into view and taken out of view at a click of a button. And you can nest in there a whole host of other objects. So in this instance, how many of us would normally put our filters on a dashboard and we'd have a whole section of our dashboard sort of laid out for them? You would normally have something like a filter pane either on the left or the right or at the top where you're hosting all your filters, but it takes up that area, that dashboard space. You have to build in space to put all of those filters, which takes away the space that you can actually give to the data. Well, with these tiled collapsible containers, you can now take them out of view as you see fit and bring them back in when you want to change the filters. And as you're doing that, the space is taken up by the remaining charts in the view, which is fantastic because now you are maximizing your whole dashboard for the data that you want to look at. Yeah. Before, in that 2019.2, if you were to use a collapsible container and it was floating, you would open it up and it would float over the top of your data and it would obscure the data. So that wasn't great. But this is fantastic now because this feels a lot more sophisticated, that you're bringing something in and it's pushing all the charts to the side. I don't know if the passion in my voice comes across because I love them.
I love them, and we might not look excited, but this is so cool because you're literally optimizing your dashboard to look at exactly what you want without taking any real estate away, which is just like, oh, yes.
Exactly. And that's kind of, I like to think of Tableau and the development of Tableau is you look at the apps that you use on your phone or like custom built apps that you would use via the computer, and the sophistication of those apps, you kind of want to start building that into Tableau with your dashboards because that's what people expect to use these days. You expect to see things that can collapse away out of the way, click on a button and it'll expand something. You don't want the clunkiness of things overlaying and having to make sure that you unselect the right one in the right order to get to the next bit. It needs to feel a lot more cohesive than that. And I think this is where we are now going with collapsible containers. Now they are tiled, and it's certainly going to get better when they become dynamic. So I'm just going to bring this out a little bit just to sort of show how this is sort of laid out and built. So essentially what we have here is we've got our title, our dashboard. And in our dashboard, we have a container, which is a vertical, and that container holds the title and the subtitle. And then it holds another container inside, which is here, which is a horizontal. So let me open up the hierarchy a second. So we're looking at a horizontal container here, and that horizontal is holding a vertical container, which holds this section, and then our filter pane. So the filter pane, which is another vertical container, you'll see this is sort of expanding out a second. So we've got our filter pane, which is this one, and then the pane for all of our data next to it. I'll just collapse those down. Those are both into that horizontal that I just mentioned in the middle. So that horizontal is sharing both those two verticals. And what we're doing is we have selected this vertical, and in the drop down in the pill here, we added a show hide button to this. So let me just take this out a second. And if I were to do it again, we should get the add show hide button option. And that's all I did, was I added a show hide button to that vertical so that holds all of the filters. Now, if I were to go into full screen and select that, that collapses away. And then you click it again, it brings it back. And so it's really straightforward. This has been set to a certain width. So the vertical, this filter pane vertical has been set to a certain width in pixels so that it opens and collapses to that width. Really straightforward, really easy to set up. You've just got to think about the structure of your dashboard and how you want it to act. So that's a really straightforward use case, bringing in your filters into your view and hiding them away when you no longer need them to maximize the space for your data.
Love it. It's such a simple change, but a big impact for when you're thinking about your end user. And we know by building business dashboards, you can have millions of various different filters, and sometimes it gets confusing when they're all just laying out in a strip when you're trying to figure out what's interacting with what. I just feel like this is such an easy, clear, clean way that it's not distracting too.
Yeah.
And what a great improvement for the end user.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at another use case here. This is probably my favorite of the lot that I'm going to show. And in this use case, I really like the idea of allowing your users to focus in on a single chart in your dashboard if you can. So you might give them an overview of a number of different charts that tell a story, give them the insight of their data, but they might be particularly interested in looking into one of those charts in a little bit more detail. Now, what you can do with this now is you can set up a customization sort of system, so you can turn off and on individual charts. So if I wasn't interested in this chart particularly, I could turn that chart off, and the chart next to it would take up that area. Okay. If I really just wanted to focus on this one chart, I could turn off the whole of the bottom section of charts. And this is all by collapsible containers. So now I've got maximizing the whole of the dashboard for a single chart. I can bring them back in. I can change them around by playing around with what I've got here to focus in on individual views. It's just customizable with us. This might not be the best sort of grid system that I've put in here to show it, but it's more about the power of what's available now by using these show and hide containers to bring individual elements of your dashboard in and out of view. And then when you take them out of view, the rest expands to fill that space. And I think when I'll talk about it now with where we are looking to go with dynamic collapsible containers that they mentioned in the devs on stage session, this TC, where the dynamic collapsible containers now can be controlled by parameters that are on your dashboard. And if it's a parameter, you can also control that by a parameter action. So what that means is if I wanted to focus in on, say, the scatter plot down here, when I have it in view, so it's the only chart in view, I could set that up so a parameter could record that to say that when this parameter is on for this scatter plot, and for each of these other charts, the parameters for those are off, I could then bring in more detail to this view because we now have space for more detail. So it could be that I could bring in annotations. It could be that I bring in the option to select on it to dive down into the data more deeply because I now have space to show more marks. When you have a number of charts in the dashboard, all sharing that dashboard space, they're fighting for space essentially, and you don't want to overcrowd them by putting too much on there that you cannot read. So trying to dive into the marks into a scatter plot in a space like this, you're not going to get as an accurate sort of reading from it than if you were having that scatter plot take the whole of the space of the dashboard. So this is where I'm really excited by dynamic collapsible containers or dynamic show and hide containers.
And that really is a wonderful, I was going to say that's a wonderful change because I know a lot of the dashboards I've built, you're trying to build for various different users. Some want to see the bird's eye view, some want to see more granular. So being able to build something where they may be able to, they have the option to then drill as they want is would be a fantastic change using these tiled collapsible containers. So very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could start doing things where you're sheet swapping to when you have a chart that is in view with the whole of the dashboard, you could swap it for a version that is formatted in a lot better way for that space.
Without actually using sheet swap, because that's
without actually using sheet swap, you could just bring in using your collapsible containers. Yeah. There's a whole host of different sort of things where you can go with this, I think. And I did do a Tableau idea earlier in the year about trying to have buttons that can be controlled by parameters, and in that I had a few ideas, but I think that I probably am only scratching the surface here by talking about sheet swapping or changing the view or adding annotations or the granularity that you're seeing as you're clicking into, as you're changing your dashboard view here. I'm sure there's going to be more that will come out once we get that version to us and we get our hands on it and we can play with it. But anyway, so this is sort of the second sort of use case here that I thought of is that customizable dashboard space.
Sam, could you just, if you don't mind, let us know how you created the chart customization little tab?
Yeah, of course.
All... Sorry.
So, yeah, so they are. So when I just showed on the last one, bringing in the button for the show hide container. Yeah, each of these are its own button.
Got it.
So if I bring everything back in view, so this chart here is, I would have gone into here and I would have added in, it would have had the option to add show hide container. This is just floating on top of the dashboard. It's a container in its own right, but it's not a show hide one. It's a vertical with some horizontals in there. So I don't do anything easily, I probably. But so it's another container with a horizontal container, and in that horizontal container you have 3 buttons. You've got one button that is controlling the worksheet for the scatter plot, another button for the bullet chart, and then you've got the eye icon, which is actually controlling the horizontal container.
Love it.
Yeah. And then and essentially that's how I've built this. When I was thinking of the idea, I came up with some custom icons to sort of match what I was doing, but I couldn't really think of another way to try and get it to be a little bit more obvious over what this might do. Even now, I don't think this is quite right. I don't think you could hand that to somebody and they would immediately know, right, if I click on this, that's going to hide away. Or if I click on this, the whole row is going to hide away. There's still more to do on that side of the UI to help your everyday user. But from a showcase, I think it does the job. And then just another one I'm going to show off is, so we looked at bringing in the filters on the side, moving our charts out the way or to the side to allow room for the filters. Now, some of our filters and the parameters that we use in Tableau tend to be specific to certain charts on the dashboard. Mm-hmm. Now, that can be a pain when you're using a filter pane like this. You know, sometimes you have to specify in the title of the filter to say this relates to this chart, or you have to do something, or you end up moving the filter next to the chart, and then you're either floating it on your dashboard, and we don't really like floating objects on dashboards because they never publish quite where you expect them to be. And if you have a company that likes to use ranged size dashboards that will change when you are viewing them on different screens, then your floating objects will move around, essentially. So that's kind of the issues that we have with filters is when they are specific to certain charts, you either have to float them next to them. You can nest them in the tiled section, but then they're suddenly taking up more room in your dashboard. So I could probably do this now. I could move this into here and say, okay, so region relates only to this chart. But suddenly I'm using this whole space in my dashboard just for a filter. This vertical space is being taken away from my scatter plot, and suddenly it's really crunching it up. Yeah. So where we can use collapsible or show and hide containers are these little eye icons that I've put in next to them. And that's just simply where you can open up a space that holds those filters that relate only to this tile. And that sort of proximity of where it is will really sort of help to show that, okay, this obviously relates to this particular chart because it's next to it. And then you can bring in more information. It could be parameters, it could be filters, it could be just legends like size legends or color legends that you want it there for information for when people need it, but maybe you don't want it there all the time in the you know, the sort of default view as such. And then your filter pane on the right here becomes a global filter pane, so that it only hosts filters or parameters that control everything on your dashboard. So you can make that distinction.
That makes me wonder, when you're saying the future of the dynamic, I wonder, could you click a chart and make your global filter pane dynamically update with what applies for that chart?
I expect so. I expect you probably could.
I'd have to think through that, but very fascinating. Like, it's all like a world of opportunities to play with.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, don't get me wrong; these are quite awkward to set up from a sort of architecture side of the build, and that wasn't a plan, but that probably leads me into the next sort of bit, where let's have a look at Invis. So this was my Invis final viz that you mentioned at the start of the show. Now, I'm going to show you the behind the scenes on this in a second. So show you sort of the thinking behind how this works. Now, I know people watched me do this and were a little bit stunned that I could remember where to put all the containers and all the objects and everything as I was building it in that 20 minutes. But there was a complete logic and a lot of practice that went behind that. And it's not easy to do it, but when it's done right, I think you can really get a good effect from that. So this was the Invis, where what I'm doing here, so I started clicking around, where I have a show and hide container button here that is custom. And when I select that, it opens up a chart that pushes this narrative up the page. But it also brings in another show and hide button that if you select on that one, it brings in the next section. So when you were to, say, select on one of these data stories in my final build, then it brings in more data about this particular artist, which is Fleetwood Mac. And then we've got another button that's appeared in the sequence. And then we select on that, and that brings through like the next stage in the story. So this is like a concertina effect, that you have to open one before you get the next button. And this was where, if I sort of digress a little bit, from an Invis final perspective, in 20 minutes and in the 2 weeks that we had to prepare for it all, I was trying to work out where could I create something that other people probably haven't seen. I don't have time to do anything particularly fancy with charts. I don't want that risk of trying to find the story a week later, then trying to come up with some calculations that might work, and it might be able to build it in 20 minutes. And this was something that I wanted to try out from a storytelling perspective, was opening up a sequence of sections on your dashboard. And this just is kind of how it ended up, as a concertina effect. So we've got so essentially it's just a web object here that is being controlled by a show and hide button. So when I collapse it down, it disappears and this space is shared. And then I've got a vertical here that is being controlled by the next button. And in that vertical, sorry, before I click it, is this button that was relating to the web object. So when I select this, this button will disappear along with the rest. So it just leaves that button that I last selected. And again, this is part of this section here, which is in a horizontal, which is controlled by this back button. And that's essentially what I did in my Invis from a collapsible container, or show and hide buttons. Now, the behind the scenes is,
yes, tell us how you did this craziness.
is this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, just all of the intricacies, like in the it's
So-
the little bits that you have there that is just wow.
So this hasn't been prepared for this talk. Okay, this is actually my preparation file. I know I love Adobe stuff, so I use Adobe Illustrator. This is my preparation file for Invis. So if I were to zoom out, you'd sort of see more of this stuff. There's some of the charts I was taking from Tableau. And then there's a lot more sort of layout stuff that I was looking into with how to build it and where I could save time. But this was basically a schematic of what I was going to try and build. And this evolved as I went through practicing Invis, taking out charts. I didn't really add charts in, it was all taking stuff out just to try and speed it up. But essentially, this is what I've just shown you from the final build. Okay. And these are all the objects that are in here. So we've got 7 vertical containers, 5 horizontal containers, 4 worksheets. So that was the line chart. That was the narrative sheet that I was using. So this was the area chart, and this was the stacked bar that became 100% stacked bar when you change it. Only 3 show and hide buttons. So there's one there that controlled the sheet with the areas. There was one here that came in when you open this up that controlled the next container here, which was a horizontal container that also had another button that controlled the web object container. A few parameters. I think there was over 30 objects in here that I had to nest and remember where to put them when I was doing the final. So it was a bit full on. But how this kind of
full on is understatement. This is insane.
Just looking at this in Adobe, I'm like, wow. This is fantastic. Just the prep is impressive, but then taking it into Tableau, it's even more impressive.
Yeah, I was printing off these views as I was going through like the final week or so of preparation before we did the final. And I was printing them off, putting them next to me to try and remember what I was doing as I was practicing stuff. I thought I was going to have these when I did the final next to me, just to remind me. And then when you do the final, you literally have no time to look away from your screen. Right. You might think you might have lots of notes around because it was a virtual final this year. So you'd think I might have lots of post-it notes telling me what to say, or I had none of that or what to do, because you're just so focused on
the adrenaline
the
too,
actual doing. Everything becomes just, you don't even take it in. So even though the plan was I was going to draw this out so I could remember it and help me if I got stuck, it never ended up that way, but it certainly helped me remember what I was building. And what I was just going to show you was I can break this back. So this red section is the title. Mm-hmm. The red section at the bottom down here is the footer. So those two were the only images that I was using. When you start off on the viz, go here. So you've got the title, you've got the footer. Those were those 2 red sections. You've got one container and a container with a single worksheet, which is some narrative stuff. That is this container here and this container with the worksheet. Because this area of objects are collapsed away, these two share the whole width of the dashboard between them. So that's how we're seeing it on here, sharing the space. Similarly, this section here is collapsed away because we haven't selected that button yet. And because you've collapsed it away, that worksheet takes up the full height. So then when you do click the button, click this button, it controls this container. this brings in, and then these two sections, this worksheet and this container, share the height. So that's how, when you bring it in, it opens up or forces itself in there, which then it brings in this second button. So we can then select that second button to bring in another section of our storytelling. And in that container are more containers, more worksheets, and another button. And then you can select that button to get to the final result of the answer. And that's how that all sort of kind of works. And I don't really know. That's kind of where my mind went with this.
No, I'm watching you explain this, and all I think about is like all of the work that you put out for Tableau Public, your IronViz, just collectively. I want to spend the day in Sam's brain because this is impressive. It's impressive, all of the intricate pieces here, and how you put this together.
Thank you. I don't know what goes on in my brain. I just try things, and I don't know. I don't know what goes on in there. People ask me how I do stuff sometimes, and I think I have ideas, and I think logically I should be able to do it in Tableau. I should be able to do, like, it could be a complex chart. I can picture it, so I must be able to do it in Tableau. And then I reach things where I just get frustrated when Tableau starts grinding to a halt and I'm trying to do stuff. And other times it actually works and I get there. But I don't know. I don't know how I do it. I just sort of... I mean,
Sam, when you were explaining it on IronViz, like showing we were watching it, and then you explained your viz, it was incredible. But now we're seeing the intricacy that went on behind the scenes, and I'm like speechless. My mind is just blown. Seriously.
Just all of the steps and the meticulous and the well thought out. I feel like it demonstrates to me, like, when I'm amazed by the things that you do, it demonstrates to me just the time and the thought process. And like you said, you're able to sometimes see it before you do it. Whereas I sometimes struggle with that. Like, I'll get inspired by ideas or imagery, but I don't always see it. So it's fantastic to kind of see people's different creative processes and how you're able to execute.
I wouldn't lay claim to see the final sort of thing in my mind of what I'm trying to get to. Quite often it just sort of evolves as I go. Certainly my feeder viz, where the Rivers of Time, that main chart, that never started off like that. It was never the idea to end up like that. It was just something that evolved as I was bringing the data in and making things work. And I was like, I bent it around a circle. I thought, okay, that's okay, but I need more space. So maybe I'll try and bend it around 2 circles. Well, I can only do that if I make them do this. So I did that horizontally, and I was like, well, that's cool, but would it be cooler if I can make it like this and make more space? And I did, and then I started reducing down the lines so they tapered in. It was just more of an evolution of stuff, and that's kind of where this sort of stuff comes in as well.
It's just
I have an idea, but I don't know where it's going to end up completely. And that's where I think I really, really missed in an IronViz perspective is I have that, I really like the time that you can take to self-critique what you've done. So I will very often be taking images of various stages as I'm building something to go, okay, I've built this chart and I've just used these color combinations, and I'll take an image and I'll bring it onto my phone. And then I might tweak it going, I'll look at it on my phone and go, okay, it's okay, I'll tweak it. And then I'll bring that image to my phone, and then I'll be flicking before, after. Which do I like? Okay, I can see this one stands out more than that one. Okay, I'll scrap the old one and I'll move on. And that's kind of that self-critique of what you're doing. You don't get that in IronViz preparation because you just don't have time.
Right.
As soon as you've built something, your next thing is, right, now I need to practice it, see if I can get it done in 20 minutes. It's not a case of, am I telling the story the best way I can? You don't have time to sort of dive into that too much. So Yeah.
That's where I love the feeders. And I remember seeing yours when you put it out there. We were, I believe, at the office. You, me, and Kevin, or yeah, Danushki, me, and Kevin were at the office looking at all of these. We got to yours. It was just like, it's beautiful. But I think that's the difference where I'm sure the Iron Viz is all about finding the story, like you said, figuring out what you're going to do, building it quickly. Whereas that feeder is all about the art of the story. It's the art of your style and your ability to just paint that. And I love it.
Yeah.
I love that part of the process.
I will say, Sam, that I have downloaded your feeder viz many times, and I would look at it and I'd be like, oh my God, it's all map layers.
I can't.
And then I would just close it, and then I would go back and be like, wait, yeah, it's all map layers. Like everything is map. What? And then I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm never going to be able to do something like this.
Yeah, you keep thinking, maybe I can today try to figure this out. No, not today. That's awesome. That's awesome that you've created something that has people scratching their heads, that pushes the limits. That's like
always,
in my opinion, that should be like what we achieve for the Iron Viz, right? Is wowing and pushing the limits and boundaries, and leave people wondering, how did you do that? Like,
I agree. For years I've looked at Iron Viz and I've thought it's a very strange competition, because you're promoting to the final those that can really pull together a story in a length of time, a month amount of time, to pull together data and tell a story and create something very visual that draws people in. And then you're thrusting those people that have those skills into a situation where right now
pressure cooker,
we're going to chuck some data at you. You've got 2 weeks to look at that data, prepare that data, find a story, do it, and then you've got to build it within 20 minutes. So my Iron Viz final build was very different to what I had originally built, because I had to strip stuff out because it was too slow.
Right.
I couldn't risk building stuff and waiting 10 seconds for Tableau to do its thing to show me the next before I can move on in a live final. And you don't have those concerns when you're in the feeder round, because it doesn't matter. You can take as long as you like on your viz, build it up and present something that wows people. What I will say with my feeder is it's quite gratuitous, in the sense that I didn't need to do it in map layers. The only reason that you probably would want to do it in map layers is if it became a bit more interactive and dynamic and it would change. But I could have easily floated sheets on sheets. But I think a lot of me being me is I challenge myself to do stuff like that. So I look at what other people do in the community and outside the community and think, well, surely I can do something like that. There's still a lot of cheating going on in that viz, because there's a lot of the lines and the labels are from Illustrator. But it was I made peace with that, because it was a static image, essentially. It wasn't changing. So I was quite happy just to use Illustrator to add a bit of flourish to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're not here to talk about Iron Viz, are we? So the only other thing in here, in this Illustrator file that might be of interest, was breaking it down, the schematic here, into this. And actually, no, this is more Iron Viz. Sorry. So I brought this in so I could, so each of these boxes is essentially an object and where they're nesting. And I was trying to understand, what was I using default settings from Tableau and what wasn't I using default? So where could I save time? Did I need to change the padding? Did I need to, so like the numbers here, the inner and outer paddings, the hex codes, the size of the actual object. So I was using this to really understand, when I'm building, what am I moving away from the default? Do I need to do that? Because it saves time if I can just drag something in and it has the default padding of 444. But this is just another way of looking at this, which is a bit more visual, I guess. And so that's tiled show and hide containers. And as I mentioned before, TC really dangled that carrot in front of us. I don't know when this dynamic parameter sort of driven show and hide containers are coming out, but I'm hoping for next year. And just being able to say click on a chart and a section of your dashboard disappears or comes in because it's controlled by a parameter from that chart is just going to be, I cannot wait to see what people come up with in the community. I certainly know that I'm going to be playing with it, and I know that Kevin's going to be playing with it because he's very much like me. He likes to play with the new stuff. And it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Yes, I'm very excited. And I'm very excited that you were able to share this with us. And I cannot wait to start using the most recent version of Tableau all over again. I've been unfortunately lost in an older version, limited by a server I was on. So this is so exciting. I can't wait. You have me ready to go.
Yeah, Sam, this is so inspiring and of course mind-blowing, but now I'm just like, while you were talking, all I could think about was, oh, how can I incorporate this in my work? Yeah. So thank you for spending time with us, inspiring us and blowing our minds.
No, that's absolutely fine. And if either of you or anybody who's watching this has any questions on this or wants any tips or help, I'm happy to help out.
Yay. You're awesome. We're so grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
It's okay. No, thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
Bye.